The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan night air like a whisper of death. Inside the Black Hawk, 8 Navy SEALs sat in complete silence, their faces painted black and green, weapons checked and rechecked. The only sounds were the steady thrum of rotors and the occasional crackle of radio chatter in their earpieces. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles and looked at his men. These weren't just any soldiers. They were the elite of the elite, members of SEAL Team 6, the most feared special operations unit in the world. Each man had survived years of brutal training, countless missions, and situations that would break ordinary men. To Morrison's right sat Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a sniper whose steady hands had ended more terrorist careers than most people had hot meals. His rifle, a custom-built .300 Winchester Magnum, lay across his lap like a sleeping predator. Rodriguez had been doing this for 12 years, and his kill count was classified information that made even hardened generals uncomfortable. Across from them, Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chen checked his explosives for the 10th time. The young Korean-American demolitions expert could turn a paperclip and some chewing gum into something that would level a building. His backpack contained enough C4 to reshape the local geography, all carefully measured and timed to the second. Next to Chen sat Petty Officer Second Class David Bull Washington, whose massive frame barely fit in the helicopter seat. The former NFL linebacker carried a machine gun that most men couldn't lift, let alone fire accurately. Bull was the team's heavy weapons specialist, and his job was simple. When things went bad, he made them go very bad for the other side. The rest of the team consisted of Petty Officer First Class Kevin O'Malley, their medic and communications specialist, Petty Officer Second Class Ahmed Hassan, their Arabic translator and intelligence analyst, Petty Officer Second Class Jake Spider Williams, their reconnaissance expert, and Petty Officer Third Class Ryan Murphy, the youngest member of the team and their technology specialist. Morrison spoke into his throat microphone, his voice barely above a whisper. "Control, this is Neptune 6. ETA to drop zone in 15 minutes. Weather is clear, no visible ground activity." The crackling response came back immediately. "Roger, Neptune 6. Target building is confirmed occupied. Intelligence suggests 15 to 20 hostiles, mixed small arms. Your package is being held on the 2nd floor, northwest corner. Extraction window opens in 90 minutes. Morrison nodded to his team. The package was CIA operative Sarah Mitchell, a deep cover agent who had been gathering intelligence on a major arms dealer named Khalil Nazir. 3 days ago, her cover had been blown, and she had gone dark. Satellite surveillance showed she was being held in a compound outside Kandahar, probably being tortured for information that could compromise dozens of operations across the Middle East. The mission was textbook: fast insertion, neutralize hostiles, extract the agent, get out before anyone knew they were there. Morrison had run similar operations more times than he could count, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the intelligence reports that seemed too clean, too convenient. Maybe it was the way command had rushed the timeline. Or maybe it was just the feeling in his gut that came from 15 years of combat experience. 2 minutes out? The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "LZ is clear, but we've got storm clouds moving in from the east. You might be looking at some weather before extraction." Morrison looked out the window at the barren landscape below. Afghanistan looked the same everywhere: brown dirt, rocky hills, and enough hiding places for an army. The compound sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines, a perfect defensive position that also happened to be a perfect kill zone if things went wrong. 1 minute, the pilot announced. The SEALs stood as one, checking their gear one final time. Morrison carried his standard HK-416 assault rifle with underslung grenade launcher. Rodriguez had his sniper rifle slung across his back and a suppressed MP7 submachine gun at his side. Each man carried enough ammunition to fight a small war, plus medical supplies, communications equipment, and specialized tools for their particular expertise. The helicopter flared and settled into a hover 6 feet above the ground. Morrison was the first out, dropping silently into the night and immediately taking a knee, his rifle scanning the darkness. The others followed in perfect sequence, each man finding his position in their standard patrol formation without a word being spoken. The Black Hawk disappeared into the night as quickly as it had come, leaving the 8 SEALs alone in hostile territory. They had 90 minutes to find Sarah Mitchell and get to the extraction point 3 kilometers away. After that, they would be on their own until a backup mission could be organized, assuming anyone even knew what had happened to them. Morrison used hand signals to deploy his team. Rodriguez moved to high ground on the southern ridge, where he could provide overwatch with his sniper rifle. Chen and Bull took point, their job to breach the compound's outer defenses. Hassan and Williams flanked left, while O'Malley and Murphy flanked right. Morrison stayed in the center, coordinating the assault and ready to adapt if things went sideways. The compound was larger than the satellite photos had suggested. A high stone wall surrounded 3 buildings arranged in a U-shape around a central courtyard. Guard towers sat at each corner. Though thermal imaging showed only 2 were occupied, intelligence had been right about the numbers. Morrison counted 19 heat signatures through his night vision, most clustered in the main building where Mitchell was supposedly being held. Rodriguez's voice whispered in Morrison's earpiece. "Overwatch in position. I've got clear shots on both towers and the main entrance, counting 4 guards on patrol, 2 more by the vehicles." Morrison smiled grimly. Rodriguez could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 meters. 6 targets would be a warm-up for him. "Copy, Overwatch. Bull and Chen, breach in 60 seconds. Everyone else on my mark." The next minute crawled by like an hour. Morrison watched the compound through his night vision, noting the guards' patrol patterns, the placement of vehicles, the best routes to the target building. Everything looked exactly like the intelligence briefing. Too exactly. "Mark," Morrison whispered. The assault began with Rodriguez's rifle speaking twice in rapid succession. The guards in the towers crumpled silently, never knowing what hit them. Bull and Chen appeared at the compound wall like ghosts, planting shaped charges that would blow a hole big enough for a truck to drive through. The explosion lit up the night sky and shook the ground like an earthquake. Before the echo faded, the SEALs were moving. Bull charged through the smoking breach, his machine gun chattering death at anything that moved. Chen followed, his assault rifle picking off targets with surgical precision. Morrison and the others poured through the gap, spreading out and advancing on the main building. So far, everything was going according to plan. The guards were confused, disorganized, and dying fast. Hassan's voice crackled through the radio, translating the panicked Arabic shouts. They were calling for help, trying to organize a defense, and failing at both. "Second floor, northwest corner," Morrison reminded his team as they reached the main building. Murphy and O'Malley secured the ground floor while Chen planted charges on the stairwell. The explosion would be controlled, designed to stun rather than kill. They needed Mitchell alive. The charges detonated with a sharp crack, and the SEALs flowed up the stairs like water finding the easiest path. Resistance was lighter than expected. Most of the guards were either dead or running, and those who stayed to fight were quickly overwhelmed by superior training and firepower. Morrison reached the northwest corner room and found the door locked. A quick kick sent it flying off its hinges, and he stepped inside with his rifle raised. The room was empty except for a chair, some rope, and a few bloodstains on the floor. "Package not here," Morrison reported, his voice tight with concern. "Room shows signs of recent occupation, but it's empty." Hassan's voice came back immediately. "Boss, we've got a problem. I'm hearing radio chatter from outside the compound. Sounds like reinforcements, maybe 15 minutes out." Morrison felt the first cold touch of fear. Intelligence had said the nearest enemy forces were at least an hour away. Either the intelligence was wrong, or they had walked into a trap. "All teams, sound off," Morrison ordered. "Chen and Bull, main building secured." No sign of the package. "O'Malley and Murphy, ground floor clear. Found some communications equipment, but it's been destroyed." "Williams, perimeter secure." "But boss, I'm seeing movement on the ridge lines. Looks like we've got company coming from multiple directions." Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter, calm and professional as always. "Overwatch to all teams. I count approximately 40 hostiles moving in from the north and east. They're using the ridge lines for concealment, but they'll be in firing position in less than 10 minutes. And boss, they've got heavy weapons. I can see at least 2 machine gun teams and what looks like mortar tubes." Morrison's blood ran cold. 40 hostiles with heavy weapons meant this wasn't a rescue operation anymore. It was a fight for survival. Someone had fed them false intelligence, and now they were trapped in a kill zone with no support and no way out. "Control, this is Neptune 6. We have been compromised. Request immediate extraction and close air support. We are heavily outnumbered and taking fire." The response was filled with static and delay. "Neptune 6, extraction is not available at this time due to weather conditions. Stormfront has moved in faster than expected. You are weapons-free for defensive operations. Support will be provided as soon as possible." Morrison cursed under his breath. Weather conditions meant the helicopter couldn't fly, which meant they were stuck until the storm passed. That could be hours, and they didn't have hours. "All teams fall back to the main building. We're going to ford up and wait for extraction. Rodriguez, how much time do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less." "They're moving fast and they know what they're doing. This isn't some random militia. These guys are trained." Morrison made the hardest decision of his career. Instead of trying to escape, which would leave them exposed in open ground against superior numbers, they would make their stand in the compound. The stone buildings would provide some protection, and they had enough ammunition for a prolonged fight. "All teams, defensive positions. Bull, set up your gun to cover the main approach. Chen, booby-trap the entrances we're not using. Everyone else, find good firing positions and prepare for contact." The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, turning the compound from their target into their fortress. Bull positioned his machine gun to sweep the main courtyard, while Chen rigged explosives at potential breach points. Morrison took position at a second-floor window where he could coordinate the defense and provide covering fire. Rodriguez remained on the ridgeline, his sniper rifle ready to pick off targets as they appeared. But even his expert marksmanship couldn't stop 40 men with heavy weapons. They needed a miracle, or they needed help from somewhere else. The first enemy soldiers appeared on the ridgeline just as the storm clouds opened up and rain began to fall. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled across the valley. The weather that was preventing their extraction was also providing perfect cover for the enemy advance. Morrison watched through his night vision as the hostiles took positions on the high ground around the compound. They were good, disciplined, organized, and equipped with modern weapons. Whoever had set this trap had invested serious resources in it. "Contact front!" Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "I count 12 tangos moving down the north slope. Machine gun team setting up at 2 o'clock, mortar position at 11 o'clock. Morrison could see muzzle flashes in the darkness as the enemy opened fire. Bullets began striking the compound walls, sending chips of stone flying. The SEALs returned fire, their disciplined shots finding targets in the darkness. But for every enemy soldier they dropped, 2 more seemed to take his place. "Incoming mortars!" Rodriguez shouted. The first mortar round exploded in the courtyard, showering the buildings with shrapnel and debris. Morrison felt the floor shake beneath his feet as more rounds impacted around the compound. The enemy had them bracketed and was walking their fire closer to the buildings. "Bull, light them up," Morrison ordered. The big machine gun opened up with a sound like the world ending. Bull swept his fire across the ridgeline, forcing the enemy to take cover and disrupting their assault. But Morrison knew it was only temporary. They were outnumbered 6-1, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Another mortar round exploded, this one hitting the building next to them. The blast shattered windows and brought down part of the roof. Morrison felt blood running down his face from flying glass, but he kept firing. Around him, his men fought with the desperate efficiency of professionals who knew they were probably going to die. "Boss," Hassan called out, his voice tight with pain. "I'm hit. Took shrapnel in the leg. But I can still fight." Morrison looked around at his team. These men had followed him into hell more times than he could count, and they had always made it out together. He wasn't about to let that streak end in some forgotten valley in Afghanistan. The sound of gunfire was constant now, punctuated by the crash of mortar rounds and the occasional explosion as Chen's booby traps found victims. The enemy was closing in from all sides, their numbers allowing them to absorb casualties that would have stopped a smaller force. Rodriguez's rifle cracked repeatedly from his overwatch position, each shot finding a target. But even his expertise couldn't stop the inevitable. There were too many of them, and they were getting closer with each passing minute. Morrison keyed his radio one more time. "Control, this is Neptune 6. We are surrounded and heavily outnumbered. If extraction is not possible, we request immediate close air support. We cannot hold this position much longer." The response was filled with static and frustration. "Neptune 6, all aircraft are grounded due to weather. Storm cell is massive and moving slowly. Earliest possible support is 4 hours. 4 hours. Morrison knew they didn't have 4 minutes, let alone 4 hours. The enemy was already at the outer wall, and their ammunition was running low. In a few minutes, the compound would be overrun, and 8 of America's finest warriors would disappear into the Afghan night. That's when Morrison heard it. A single rifle shot that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was different from the constant chatter of automatic weapons. Different from Rodriguez's precision fire. This was something else entirely. A sound that seemed to cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. And then, impossibly, the enemy fire began to slacken. The sound came again. Another single rifle shot that seemed to pierce the night like thunder rolling backward. Morrison pressed himself against the window frame and tried to locate the source, but the sound seemed to come from the mountains themselves, echoing off the valley walls until it was impossible to pinpoint. What he could see were the results. Through his night vision, Morrison watched as an enemy machine gunner who had been pouring fire into their position suddenly pitched forward, his weapon going silent. The man had been nearly 800 meters away, positioned behind good cover on the ridgeline. Whoever had made that shot was operating at the very limits of what was humanly possible. "Rodriguez, was that you?" Morrison called into his radio. The response came back immediately. "Negative, boss. I'm seeing the same thing you are. Someone else is out there and they're really, really good." A third shot echoed across the valley, and another enemy position went quiet. This time Morrison caught a glimpse of the muzzle flash, just a brief flicker of light from a peak almost a kilometer away. The distance was so extreme that most snipers wouldn't even attempt the shot, let alone make it in combat conditions with wind and rain. Bull's machine gun had fallen silent as he tried to conserve ammunition, but now he opened up again with renewed vigor. "Boss, whatever angel is watching over us, I ain't complaining. But we're still pinned down good." Morrison keyed his radio to the command frequency. "Control, this is Neptune 6. We have unknown friendly support in our area. Single sniper, extreme range, taking out enemy positions. Can you confirm any other assets in our vicinity?" The response was immediate and confused. "Neptune 6, negative on any friendly assets in your area. All special operations teams are accounted for, and no conventional forces are within 50 kilometers of your position. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Someone was out there helping them, someone with skills that matched or exceeded anything he had ever seen. But according to command, that someone didn't exist. Another shot rang out, and Morrison watched as the enemy mortar team that had been bracketing their position suddenly lost their spotter. The man had been crouched behind a boulder, completely invisible except for the brief moment when he raised his head to call corrections. Whoever was shooting had been watching and waiting for exactly that moment. "Movement to the north," Williams called out. "Looks like a squad trying to flank around to the back wall." Morrison shifted position to get a better view. Sure enough, a group of 6 enemy soldiers was working their way through the rocks, using the darkness and rain for concealment. They were good, moving in bounds, providing covering fire for each other, advancing by the book. In another few minutes, they would be at the compound's rear wall. Morrison was about to order Chen to reposition when the distant rifle spoke again. The lead enemy soldier simply collapsed, his weapon clattering against the rocks. The others immediately took cover, scanning the darkness for the source of the shot, but their position was now completely exposed to Morrison's team. "All teams, we have targets to the north. Light them up." The SEALs opened fire with coordinated precision. Without the covering darkness, the flanking team was caught in the open and quickly eliminated. But Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The enemy had enough men to probe from multiple directions at once, and eventually they would find a weakness. Hassan's voice crackled through the radio, tense with pain but still professional. "Boss, I'm monitoring enemy radio chatter. They're confused about the sniper, too. They're calling it the Ghost and asking for instructions." Morrison smiled grimly. At least the enemy was as confused as they were. But confusion wouldn't save them if they couldn't hold their position long enough for extraction. The mysterious sniper fired again, and another enemy position went quiet. Morrison was beginning to see a pattern in the shooting. The sniper wasn't just picking random targets. He was systematically eliminating the enemy's key assets. First the machine gunners and mortar teams, now the squad leaders and radio operators. Each shot was removing a piece of the enemy's ability to coordinate and fight effectively. "Rodriguez, can you get a read on this guy's position?" "I think he's moving, boss. Each shot seems to come from a different location, always from extreme range." "This isn't just a good sniper. This is someone who understands this terrain like his backyard." Morrison processed this information while keeping up his own fire. Someone who knew the terrain suggested a local asset, but the shooting skills suggested military training at the highest level. The combination didn't make sense unless... His thoughts were interrupted by Chen's voice. "Incoming! Multiple contacts from the east wall!" Morrison spun around to see enemy soldiers scaling the compound's eastern wall. These weren't probing attacks anymore. This was a coordinated assault from multiple directions. The enemy had decided to accept casualties and overrun the position through sheer numbers. Bull's machine gun swiveled to meet the new threat, his heavy bullets punching through the stone wall and the men trying to climb over it. But even as he cut down the first wave, Morrison could see more enemy soldiers massing for another assault. "Chen, blow the east wall charges!" The explosives detonated with a thunderous roar, bringing down a section of wall and anyone who happened to be climbing over it. But the gap they created was now another breach that the enemy could exploit. Murphy's voice came through the radio, high-pitched with adrenaline. "Movement to the south. Looks like at least 10 tangos moving on our 6. Morrison realized with growing dread that they were being attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. Even with the mysterious sniper's help, 8 men couldn't hold against this kind of coordinated assault. They were about to be overrun. That's when the night erupted into chaos. The distant rifle began firing rapidly, not the careful, aimed shots from before, but a sustained barrage that seemed impossible from such range. Enemy soldiers began dropping all around the compound, their assault faltering as commanders and key personnel fell to the phantom marksmen. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez breathed over the radio. "I count 12 shots in 15 seconds, all hits, all from different positions. Boss, whoever this is, they're not human." Morrison didn't have time to wonder about their guardian angel's nature. The enemy assault was crumbling under the precise fire from the mountains, and he needed to take advantage of the opportunity. "All teams, advance and engage. Drive them back while we have the chance." The SEALs burst from their defensive positions like unleashed wolves. Bull's machine gun swept the courtyard while Chen and O'Malley moved to secure the breached wall. Williams and Murphy flanked wide to cut off enemy escape routes, while Hassan provided covering fire despite his wounded leg. Morrison found himself face to face with an enemy soldier who had made it over the north wall. The man was young, maybe 20, with the lean build of someone who had grown up in these mountains. He raised his AK-47 just as Morrison's HK-416 swung toward him. Both men fired at the same time. Morrison felt the bullet tug at his body armor as his own shots took the enemy soldier center mass. The man crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering away into the darkness. Morrison checked himself for wounds and found nothing but a torn equipment pouch where the bullet had passed. The firefight was intense but brief. Caught between the SEALs' assault and the continued fire from their unseen benefactor, the enemy force broke and began to withdraw. Morrison watched through his night vision as surviving enemy soldiers retreated back up the ridge lines, dragging their wounded with them. "All teams, sound off," Morrison called. "Chen here. Minor shrapnel wounds but operational." "Bull, I'm good. Machine gun took some hits but still functional." "O'Malley here. Treating Hassan's leg wound, but he'll make it." "Williams, couple of scratches, but nothing serious." "Murphy, all good, boss." "Rodriguez, still in overwatch position. I count approximately 15 enemy KIA, the rest are withdrawing. But boss, they're not going far. They're setting up new positions further back." Morrison nodded. The enemy had been bloodied but not defeated. They would reorganize and try again, probably with a different strategy. And the SEALs were running low on ammunition. "Control, this is Neptune 6. We've repelled the initial assault with unknown support, but we're still surrounded and low on ammo. What's the status on extraction?" "Neptune 6. Weather is beginning to clear. Extraction helicopter is preparing to launch. ETA 45 minutes. Hold your position." 45 minutes. Morrison looked around at his battered team and wondered if they could last that long. Hassan was wounded, they were low on ammunition, and the enemy would be back with a vengeance. As if reading his thoughts, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Boss, movement on all ridge lines. Looks like they're setting up for another assault, this time from longer range. And I think they brought friends. I count at least 60 tangos now." Morrison felt his heart sink. 60 enemy soldiers with the high ground and heavy weapons. Even with their mysterious protector, the odds were overwhelming. That's when Hassan spoke up from his position by the wall. "Boss, I'm still monitoring their radio chatter. They're scared of the sniper, calling him the demon of the mountains. But they've got orders from high command to take us alive if possible." Morrison frowned. Alive? That was unusual. Most terrorist organizations preferred to make examples of captured American soldiers, unless... "Hassan, can you get more details on those orders?" Hassan listened for a moment, then his face went pale. "Boss, they're not regular Taliban or Al-Qaeda. These guys are talking about delivery schedules and payment arrangements. This is a kidnapping operation, not a terrorist attack." Morrison felt the pieces clicking into place. The false intelligence about Sarah Mitchell's location. The perfectly positioned enemy forces. The orders to take them alive. Someone had set this up from the beginning, using the SEALs as bait in some larger scheme. But who? And why? Before he could pursue that line of thinking further, the enemy opened fire again. This time, it wasn't a coordinated assault. It was suppressing fire designed to keep the SEALs pinned down, while other elements moved into position. Morrison could see the enemy strategy clearly now. They would use their numbers to surround the compound completely, then methodically close the noose until resistance was impossible. It was a sound, tactical plan that would work unless the SEALs could break out or get reinforced. The distant rifle cracked again, and Morrison saw an enemy machine gun team go down. But this time, the return fire was immediate and overwhelming. The enemy had spotted at least the general area where the shots were coming from and was pouring bullets into the mountainside. "Unknown sniper, if you can hear this frequency, you need to relocate," Morrison transmitted on the general emergency channel. "You're taking fire from multiple positions." There was no response, but the shooting from the mountains stopped. Morrison hoped that meant their guardian angel was moving to a safer position rather than the alternative. "Boss!" O'Malley called out, his voice tight with concern. "Hassan's losing too much blood. I've got the bleeding stopped for now, but he needs real medical attention soon." Morrison looked at his wounded translator. Hassan was pale, but still conscious, still monitoring enemy communications despite the growing red stain on his leg. The man was a professional, but even professionals had limits. The sound of helicopters in the distance made Morrison's heart leap, until he realized they were coming from the wrong direction. Through his night vision, he could see 3 aircraft approaching from the north, and their thermal signatures didn't match American helicopters. "Control, this is Neptune 6. We have unidentified aircraft approaching from the north. Are those ours?" "Neptune 6, negative. All friendly aircraft are still grounded except for your extraction bird, which is approaching from the south," Morrison cursed. The enemy was bringing in reinforcements by air, which meant the situation was about to get much worse. 3 helicopters could carry 60 men easily, doubling the forces arrayed against them. The helicopters settled into a landing zone about 2 kilometers away, and Morrison could see figures disembarking in the distance. These weren't the ragtag militia fighters they had been facing. These moved with military precision and discipline. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, calm despite the circumstances. "Boss, thermal imaging shows at least 40 additional hostiles from the helicopters. They're equipped with modern weapons and what looks like body armor. These aren't local fighters." Morrison felt a chill of recognition. Modern weapons, body armor, professional tactics, helicopters for transport. This had all the hallmarks of a private military contractor operation. But which one? And who was paying them? The new enemy forces began advancing on the compound with textbook precision. They moved in coordinated teams, providing covering fire for each other and using the terrain expertly. Morrison realized they were facing soldiers as well-trained as his own team, but with overwhelming numerical superiority. "All teams prepare for contact with professional military force. These aren't amateurs." The first shots from the new enemy positions were precisely aimed and coordinated. Morrison felt bullets striking the stone wall inches from his head as he ducked for cover. Around him, his men returned fire with their own brand of deadly precision, but he could see the ammunition count getting dangerously low. That's when the mountain rifle spoke again. This time the shooting was different, faster, more sustained, and from multiple positions simultaneously. Morrison watched in amazement as enemy soldiers began dropping all across the battlefield, not just from one sniper, but from what sounded like at least 3 different positions. "Rodriguez, are you seeing this?" "Affirmative, boss. I count muzzle flashes from at least 4 different locations, all at extreme range. Either one guy is moving faster than humanly possible, or we've got multiple guardian angels up there." Morrison didn't care if they had divine intervention or alien assistance at this point. The enemy assault was faltering under the precise fire from the mountains, buying precious time for the extraction helicopter to arrive. But even multiple snipers couldn't stop 100 determined enemies indefinitely. Morrison could see fresh enemy forces moving to flank their position, and his team's ammunition was nearly exhausted. In a few more minutes, it would come down to knives and fists. That's when he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of a Black Hawk helicopter approaching fast and low. The extraction bird was coming in hot, its door guns already spinning up for action. But between them and salvation lay 100 enemy soldiers who had no intention of letting them leave alive. The Black Hawk came in like an angel of death, its door gunners opening up on enemy positions as it swept over the compound. The distinctive chatter of M134 miniguns filled the air as thousands of rounds per minute poured down on the surrounding ridgelines. Enemy soldiers scattered for cover as the helicopter's firepower carved deadly paths through their ranks. Morrison keyed his radio. "Extraction bird, this is Neptune 6. We are ready for immediate pickup, but the LZ is hot. We have wounded and are low on ammunition." The pilot's voice came back crisp and professional despite the chaos around them. "Roger, Neptune 6. This is Dustoff 7-7. We're taking heavy fire but can maintain position for 60 seconds. Get your people to the LZ now." Morrison looked around the compound at his team. Hassan was barely conscious from blood loss, supported by O'Malley, who was trying to keep pressure on the wound. The others were battered and exhausted but still fighting. They had maybe 50 rounds of ammunition left between all of them. "All teams, move to extraction! Bull, cover our 6! Rodriguez, time to come home!" The SEALs began their fighting withdrawal toward the makeshift landing zone in the compound's courtyard. Bull's machine gun provided covering fire while Chen and Williams laid down suppressing fire on the nearest enemy positions. Morrison helped O'Malley carry Hassan, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, its rotors whipping up everything loose in the courtyard. Morrison could see the door gunners swiveling their weapons to engage targets on all sides, their faces grim behind protective goggles. That's when the enemy launched their final assault. Professional soldiers emerged from cover on all sides, advancing in coordinated bounds while their comrades provided covering fire. These weren't the disorganized militia fighters from earlier. These moved like special forces operators themselves, professional killers who knew their business. Morrison realized with growing horror that the enemy had been waiting for exactly this moment. They had allowed the helicopter to land and the SEALs to start their extraction, creating a perfect kill zone where everyone would be exposed and vulnerable. "Ambush!" Morrison shouted into his radio. "It's a trap!" The Black Hawk's door gunners swept their fire across the advancing enemy soldiers, but there were too many of them coming from too many directions. Morrison could see muzzle flashes erupting from every piece of cover around the compound as the professional forces launched their coordinated assault. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio from his overwatch position. "Boss, I count over 60 tangos advancing on your position from all directions. I can't get clear shots on most of them. They're using your helicopter as concealment." Morrison felt despair settling in his chest like a cold weight. They were trapped in the open, caught between the helicopter and overwhelming enemy forces. Even if they made it to the bird, it would be shot down before it could clear the valley. That's when the mountains exploded with gunfire. The mysterious snipers who had been helping them throughout the night suddenly revealed themselves in a devastating display of coordinated firepower. Morrison counted at least 6 different muzzle flashes from positions scattered across the surrounding peaks, all firing at once with mechanical precision. Enemy soldiers began dropping everywhere, not just the easy targets, but the professionals who had been using cover and concealment expertly. Shot after shot found its mark at ranges that should have been impossible in the darkness and rain. "Jesus Christ!" The helicopter pilot's voice came over the radio, filled with amazement. "Who the hell is up there? I've never seen shooting like this in my life." Morrison didn't have time to wonder about their guardian angels. He could see the enemy assault faltering under the devastating sniper fire, but it wouldn't stop them for long. Professional soldiers adapted quickly, and there were still too many of them. "All teams, get on that bird now," Morrison ordered. The SEALs sprinted across the open courtyard under covering fire from the helicopter's door gunners and their mysterious protectors in the mountains. O'Malley and Morrison carried Hassan between them, while the others provided security and returned fire at the remaining enemy positions. Bull was the last man to the helicopter, walking backward and firing his machine gun from the hip like something out of an action movie. The big man's suppressing fire kept the enemy heads down while his teammates scrambled aboard the Black Hawk. "We're up!" Morrison shouted to the pilot as he dragged Hassan into the helicopter's cargo compartment. The Black Hawk lifted off immediately, its nose dipping as the pilot pushed for maximum speed to clear the valley. Through the open doors, Morrison could see enemy soldiers emerging from cover to fire at the departing helicopter. Tracer rounds streaked past the aircraft like deadly fireflies. That's when one of the enemy soldiers got lucky with a rocket-propelled grenade. The explosion rocked the helicopter sideways, and Morrison felt the aircraft shudder and lose altitude. Warning lights flashed on the pilot's instrument panel as he fought to maintain control. "We're hit!" the pilot shouted. "Lost hydraulics and taking fire in the engine compartment. I don't know if we can make it out of the valley." Morrison looked down at the valley floor rushing up toward them and realized they were going to crash. The helicopter was losing altitude fast, and there was nowhere to land safely in the rocky terrain below. But the mountain snipers weren't done yet. The night sky suddenly lit up with tracer fire as the mysterious marksman switched from precision shooting to rapid suppressive fire. Every enemy position around the valley began taking concentrated fire, forcing the soldiers to take cover and disrupting their efforts to shoot down the damaged helicopter. "Unknown sniper units, this is Dustoff 7-7, the pilot called over the radio. "We're going down and need immediate fire support to cover our crash landing." A voice Morrison had never heard before came back over the emergency frequency, calm and professional despite the chaos. "Dustoff 7-7, this is Overwatch. We have you covered. Set down in the flat area 2 clicks south of the compound. We'll keep the bad guys busy." Morrison stared at the radio in amazement. After hours of silent guardian angel support, whoever was up there was finally talking to them. The voice was American, with just a hint of Southern accent, and it carried the unmistakable authority of someone used to giving orders in combat. The helicopter auto-rotated down toward the designated landing area, its damaged engines coughing and sputtering. Morrison could see the pilot fighting the controls as the aircraft settled toward the ground in a barely controlled crash. They hit hard, the landing gear crumpling under the impact and the fuselage skidding across the rocky ground in a shower of sparks and debris. Morrison was thrown against the bulkhead as the helicopter came to rest on its side. But he was alive and conscious. "Everyone off now," Morrison ordered. "This thing could blow any second." The SEALs scrambled out of the wreckage, dragging Hassan and helping the injured aircrew. The helicopter's fuel was leaking, creating a dangerous fire hazard, but they needed the medical supplies and communications equipment inside. Murphy worked frantically to set up their emergency radio, while O'Malley continued treating Hassan's wound using supplies salvaged from the crash. The others established a defensive perimeter around the wreckage, knowing the enemy would be coming soon. "Control, this is Neptune 6, Morrison called into the emergency radio. "Dustoff 7-7 is down. We need immediate extraction at the following coordinates." The response was filled with static but audible. "Neptune 6, all available aircraft are being scrambled to your position. ETA 90 minutes. Can you hold that long?" Morrison looked around at his battered team and the approaching enemy forces visible in the distance. 90 minutes was a lifetime in combat, especially when they were almost out of ammunition and had wounded personnel. That's when he heard footsteps approaching from the darkness. Morrison spun around with his rifle raised, expecting to see enemy soldiers advancing on their position. Instead, he found himself face to face with a figure that seemed to emerge from the shadows like a ghost. The man was tall and lean, wearing civilian clothes under military-grade body armor. His face was painted with camouflage that made him nearly invisible in the darkness. And he carried a rifle that Morrison recognized as a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum, a weapon capable of making the impossible shots they had witnessed all night. But it was the man's eyes that made Morrison's blood freeze. They were the eyes of a predator, cold and calculating, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much combat and killed too many enemies. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison?" the stranger asked, his voice the same one they had heard on the radio. Morrison nodded, his rifle still trained on the new arrival. "Who are you? And how do you know my name?" The stranger smiled, an expression that didn't reach those cold eyes. "Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, United States Navy SEALs, retired." He gestured toward the mountains around them. "Welcome to my neighborhood." Morrison felt his jaw drop. A retired Navy SEAL, operating alone in the Afghan mountains, with shooting skills that defied belief. It was impossible, but the evidence was standing right in front of him. "Sullivan?" Morrison repeated. "I've heard that name. You're supposed to be dead, killed in action 3 years ago." Sullivan's smile widened slightly. "Death was greatly exaggerated. I found I had work to finish up here." He gestured toward the approaching enemy forces. "Speaking of which, you boys might want to dig in. We've got company coming, and they're not happy about losing so many of their friends." Morrison could see vehicle headlights in the distance, along with what looked like at least 50 enemy soldiers advancing on foot. The professional soldiers who had survived the compound assault were regrouping for another attack, this time with reinforcements. "Master Chief, with respect, there are only 9 of us and maybe 200 of them," Morrison said. "Even with your help, we can't hold for 90 minutes. Sullivan reached into his pack and pulled out what looked like a military radio, but with modifications Morrison had never seen before. "Don't worry, Commander. I brought friends." He keyed the radio and spoke in what sounded like fluent Pashto, the local Afghan dialect. Morrison couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the authority in Sullivan's voice and the respectful responses from whoever was on the other end. Within minutes, Morrison began to see movement on the ridgelines around their position, but this time it wasn't enemy forces, it was local fighters, Afghan tribesmen who emerged from hidden positions like ghosts materializing from the landscape itself. Sullivan noticed Morrison's amazed expression and chuckled. 3 years is a long time, Commander, long enough to make some very good friends and some very bad enemies. The people who set up your ambush tonight? They've been making life difficult for my adopted family here. Tonight seemed like a good time to settle some old scores." Morrison watched as at least 100 Afghan fighters took positions around their defensive perimeter. These weren't regular Taliban or militia. They moved with the confidence of men defending their homeland, and their weapons were modern and well-maintained. "Who are they?" Morrison asked. "Local tribesmen whose families have been terrorized by the same private military contractors who tried to capture your team tonight," Sullivan explained. "Turns out they don't much care for foreign mercenaries operating in their territory without permission." The pieces were finally falling into place for Morrison. The false intelligence, the professional enemy forces, the orders to capture rather than kill, it all pointed to a private military operation designed to kidnap American Special Forces personnel, probably for ransom or prisoner exchange. But whoever had planned the operation had made one critical mistake. They had chosen the wrong valley in the wrong mountains. They had stumbled into the territory of a man who had supposedly died 3 years ago, but had instead become something far more dangerous, a ghost who protected these mountains and the people who lived in them. The enemy assault began just after midnight, with professional soldiers advancing under covering fire from mortars and machine guns. But this time, They weren't facing 8 exhausted SEALs with almost no ammunition. They were facing 100 Afghan fighters who knew every rock and hiding place in the valley, led by a man whose shooting skills had become legend. The battle was brief and decisive. The enemy forces, caught between the superior firepower and local knowledge of their opponents, were systematically destroyed. Those who weren't killed outright retreated into the night, leaving behind their equipment and wounded. Sullivan stood over the battlefield like a avenging angel, his rifle smoking in the cold mountain air. Around him, the Afghan fighters were already collecting weapons and attending to their own wounded. The efficiency and coordination suggested this wasn't their first joint operation. "Master Chief," Morrison said, walking over to where Sullivan was reloading his rifle, "I have to ask, what really happened 3 years ago? And why did everyone think you were dead?" Sullivan looked out over the mountains he had defended for so long, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes the best way to fight the war is to officially stop existing, Commander. Dead men don't have to follow rules or worry about political consequences. They just have to do what's right." Morrison nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Sullivan had faked his death to continue fighting the war on his own terms, free from military bureaucracy and political interference. He had become a ghost who protected the innocent and eliminated threats that the official military couldn't or wouldn't handle. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted Morrison's thoughts. This time the aircraft were definitely American. 2 Black Hawks and an Apache gunship, coming in fast and low with their weapon systems armed and ready. Sullivan keyed his modified radio one more time, speaking in English to the approaching aircraft. "Inbound flight, this is Overwatch. LZ is secure, friendlies on the ground, no hostile activity." The helicopters settled into the valley like mechanical angels, their crews already preparing for medical evacuation and extraction. Morrison watched as Navy corpsmen rushed to treat Hassan and the other wounded, while the Apache circled overhead providing security. As his team prepared for extraction, Morrison turned back to Sullivan. "Master Chief, are you coming with us?" Sullivan shook his head, slinging his rifle across his shoulder. "This is my home now, Commander. These are my people, and there's still work to do." Morrison extended his hand, which Sullivan gripped firmly. "If you ever need anything, I'll call," Sullivan promised. "And Commander, tell Command that sometimes the dead serve better than the living. Some wars don't end just because politicians sign papers." Morrison nodded and turned toward the waiting helicopter. As the Black Hawk lifted off into the night sky, he looked down at the valley that had nearly become their grave. Sullivan was already disappearing back into the mountains, becoming once again the ghost who protected these peaks and the people who lived among them. 3 hours later, Morrison sat in a debriefing room at Bagram Air Base, facing a room full of intelligence officers and senior commanders who were very interested in his story. He told them about the ambush, the professional enemy forces, and the mysterious sniper support that had saved their lives. He did not mention Master Chief Jake Sullivan by name. Some secrets were worth keeping, and some ghosts were meant to remain dead, at least on paper. The official report would state that SEAL Team 6 had been extracted successfully from a terrorist ambush, with enemy casualties in the hundreds and American casualties limited to minor wounds. The mysterious sniper support would be attributed to unidentified friendly forces and classified at the highest levels. But Morrison knew the truth. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, a dead man continued to fight his war, protecting the innocent and eliminating threats with precision that bordered on supernatural. Jake Sullivan had found his purpose in those peaks, and the mountains had found their guardian. The war in Afghanistan would continue for years, with victories and defeats on both sides. But in one small valley, in the shadow of peaks that touched the sky, the good guys had won decisively. And sometimes, in a world full of moral ambiguity and political complexity, that was enough. Hassan recovered fully from his wounds and returned to active duty 6 months later. The private military contractors who had orchestrated the ambush were never officially identified, though several mercenary companies mysteriously went out of business in the following year. The arms dealer they had been tracking, Khalil Nazir, was found dead in his compound 3 weeks later, apparently killed by a single rifle shot from extreme range. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, the locals told stories of a ghost who protected their valleys, a guardian spirit who could kill at impossible distances and appear anywhere at any time. The stories grew with each telling, as stories do, but the core truth remained constant. Sometimes the best guardian angels are the ones the world believes are already dead, and sometimes the most effective warriors are the ones who have officially stopped existing, free to fight the war that never really ends, protecting the innocent and eliminating evil wherever it might hide. Jake Sullivan had found his calling in those ancient mountains, and the mountains had found their protector. In a world where good and evil often wore the same uniform, that was a victory worth celebrating. Morrison never spoke publicly about Master Chief Sullivan, but he never forgot the lesson learned in that valley. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people the world has forgotten, and sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to remain ghosts. The official war would end eventually, with ceremonies and speeches and political declarations. But the real war, the eternal struggle between good and evil, would continue in places like that Afghan valley, fought by men like Jake Sullivan who had chosen to become legends rather than retire to comfortable civilian lives. And perhaps that was exactly as it should be.